Okay, so can you guys hear me okay? Brilliant. Yeah, first of all, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm Gurpinder Lalli from the University of Wolverhampton. I'm a reader in education for social justice and inclusion, which is quite a dated terminology now. It's kind of otherwise translated to associate professor, essentially. So what I want to do today is take the opportunity to talk about a number of my research projects, which I will narrow down to one of them eventually. First started researching food in school in 2012, and I was based in the School of Education, trained as a sociologist, so interested in the social aspect of dining. And this first book here was published after my PhD thesis titled Schools, Food and Social Learning. And that was an ethnographic piece of work that was conducted between 2012 and 2017. I took a case study approach in one particular school. So by ethnography, I kind of refer to learning more about the culture of the school, the space, doing in-depth, semi-structured interviews and observations to learn more about school mealtime. And then more recently, a collaborative piece of work titled School Farms, Feeding and Educating Children. This is an interdisciplinary collection bringing together urban planners, geographers, psychologists. It really showcases the interdisciplinary nature of food, right? The research on food in education, essentially. And the latest monograph, titled School, Space and Culinary Capital, is the product of this project, Come Dine With Me. So that's, again, I play on this term capital, which I come to defining later. It's what my kind of data led me to think about. Just for context, given that I'm based in England, so Come Dine With Me is the name of a British TV program, and where, you know, families are invited to each other's homes. It's kind of like a competition where trying to impress each other with the food you serve, and who can be the most entertaining guest, etc. So that's just something catchy, so you don't fall asleep when I'm talking, really. So yeah, culinary capital, commensality, and school mealtime. The two images that I include here represent the growing projects, my growing work, essentially, some of which is in the globalized South. So this is one of the projects funded by the World Food Programme, and here this one represents kind of the work I've been doing in the globalized North and my ethnographic work. And again, just to give add a bit of structure here, I want a brief introduction on my focus, and then the structure of my talk this morning. When I first embarked on this study, on the research, my PhD, I was presented with a paragraph, an idea that I'd have to connect food to learning, right? So I had to develop a proposal from that. Having worked as a teacher for many years before going into academia, I was kind of always frustrated with spending 30 minutes just to kind of bring students into shape, and they'd be consuming a lot of energy drinks, snacks during break times. I used to work with hard to reach, kind of vulnerable young people. I used to previously be a youth worker, so that was my kind of way in to this area. And the University of Leicester, where I did my PhD in the UK, they presented an idea to say, look, you know, they were drawing on studies from Bangladesh, the globalized South, to say, look, making connections between participation during mealtime and learning. But what I wanted to do was kind of explore somewhere where there's quite a niche, an area that was underdeveloped, and which led me to kind of look at the social aspect of eating, which, there wasn't as much research on that, and that was my way in, really. So whilst listening into all the presentations yesterday and all the important research on the calorific aspect of dining, which of course is important, we need, for me, to look beyond the headline data, to combine, take more of a mixed methods approach and really bring into the surface what's going on during mealtime. Well, what happens during that time? Interviews are great in the sense that, okay, teachers might tell me what they do, and children might say what they do during mealtime, what they like. But the observations reveal something really interesting because they don't always connect with what they said they do. So I think the user experience is so crucial. If we're going to reform mealtime in schools, we're going to think of new ways of, introducing techniques to get more children in and eating, because that's one of the problems, isn't it? The food could be great, but if the children aren't eating, we can't get them there, then that's a problem. So what we need to do, if you think of this idea of commensality, having breakfast in the hotel this morning even, it's a nice space, aesthetically pleasing, lots of choices of food, and then again, that's what brings us together. So that's quite powerful in itself. It's quite symbolic. So if we're not going to kind of respect the place where we're eating, think back to your think back to your school meal experience. Mine wasn't a very pleasant one, right? We would do physical education there. We would have assemblies, meetings, put the tables away at the end. That wasn't a very positive experience. But the schools that I've visited ever since, and where I've been doing some research, are very different to that. They really respect the space. You've got flowers on the table. It's a fixed dining space. Schools which are canteens, which are called restaurants, and different, breakout spaces where children haven't just got one fixed space to eat. That informal socialization that occurs during that time is very powerful for me. So, again, the focus here for me then are kind of four specific areas which I've been trying to work within. The policy space, which we know I can't keep up with it, right? It continues to change every day. The one thing I do believe is a school is a microcosm of society. Whatever goes on in school is reflected and could be and goes on to reflect what goes on outside, right? So school is a real powerful space where we can make changes, where we can model behaviors, and we all know that. Secondly, the sociology, as being trained as a sociologist, I'm quite observant that school food policy itself is classed, it's gendered, it's racialized in terms of the type of food served, in terms of the school food space being quite gendered, female kind of dominated, which is, representative of a patriarchal society. And in terms of the social class, school food policy, I argue, is dominated by certain social class ideology, right? So, and that's important. And for me, that's why we need to speak more to the children. They are the stakeholders, right? They are the users of mealtime. And if we're not speaking to them and collaborating and engaging them in the research, then what are we doing is what I continue to ask. Pedagogy. This notion of the pedagogic meal, which it came from it's like a Scandic terminology. It's got history in Sweden in particular, and it's this idea of using mealtime as a teaching occasion, which I agree with. It's interesting, but we have to recognize that the school meal will always be an informal space, and that's where it thrives most. That's the idea that you can really develop your social skills in that space, potentially. And there's different levels of social competence as well, So it's great for some. I've spoken to teachers in the past who have said that this young person doesn't engage much in class, but during mealtime, I'm able to talk to them a lot easier. I guess it's the moving from the formal to the informal. That's quite interesting. That's what I'm interested in. And therefore, I focus on social learning, right? So that's equipping young people with the skills they need to survive. When we're networking as adults, it typically might involve a coffee, right? A cake. I'm not the food police. Right? That's one thing I want to be, as much as I'm an advocate for fresh fruit and vegetables and trying different foods, I understand the context we're working within. I've got two young children, Savannah and Marissa, 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, two girls. And they said to me, "Daddy, can you stop giving us fruit in the morning? We want something different," right? Chopping up strawberries and, it's, and I said, "Okay, what would you like?" They said, "Can we have chocolate pancakes, please?" So, and it's reflective of society at large. It's reflective of media, when they're watching their iPads, when they go to school, the advertisements. So I think we spoke about this at length yesterday with colleagues around the room, that, it's about that balance in life. And, so I think that's quite important there. So the sensory aspect of school mealtime to me is very interesting. The symbolic nature of the space, creating an inviting arena is crucial. In terms of criticality then, quite often I go into schools. So just very quickly, where I did my PhD, this was a funded studentship, and part of the funding came from the organization, which was a food manufacturing industry, and they part funded the school being rebuilt. So I had to have there's a lot of ethical dilemmas there in the sense that, they had to be prepared that I might not be able to communicate what they wanted to hear. So essentially, the central line of argument in my initial PhD study was that whilst this school created, what they called a restaurant, an inviting space for eating, the surveillance that surrounded the everyday practices was hindering that social learning from occurring. So, the real missed opportunity, and that policing of mealtime can be problematic. But logistically, when you've got 1,000 pupils you've got to feed through the day, school mealtime becomes staggered, right? And it does need some kind of organization. I get that. So it's not so simplistic in that sense. So I want to talk about 3 things here. One specific project that was conducted between 2018 and 2019, from which I was able to produce a book, is titled School Space and Culinary Capital. Again, it's ethnographic techniques. It's going into a school, a large academy school, from the children aged 5 to 18, young people. So those are and it's quite a fairly modern one. And, it's kind of symbolic of the challenges we face today. And I've got some images of the school, so I'll share those. Secondly, just to talk about some selected projects I'm working on at the moment. And third, if you want to do ethnography in school, how do you navigate? How do you move around and negotiate the research that you're doing? Because I think, I've met professors and PhD students and people working in policy, right? So I'd like to kind of gear some of this work to say, what lessons have I learned that I can share with you, okay? Research questions then. So the first one I was interested in here was, to what extent can school meals promote forms of capital? Again, I'll come to defining this later, but in short, I'm talking about this kind of social capital that we can develop during mealtime, right? Cultural capital could be inherent where, if you were previously a teacher, and your children, they want to become teachers, they've got that kind of cultural capital essentially to provide a simplistic explanation there. They've got that heritage, right? So they're going to know what it's like to be a teacher. Social capital, though, is very different. Something you acquire in a certain space, right? And I think that school mealtime is a great example of that, where we can, some of the benefits are unseen. Some of the kind of benefits are going to be realized in the future for these young people. So it's quite hard to pin those down. And that's why we need that's why we bring the mixed methods together, to look at both aspects of what's going on. And that's what I call an enabler for me. Policy reform. So the school food plan was launched in 2013. Now, a good colleague of mine, Dr. Jason O'Rourke, is here, head teacher. and you know, he knows a lot more about what goes on in school and the challenges of policy. So I'm going to let him talk about that. But again, that's the policy space within which we're operating. We've got a new national food strategy, and you know, there is an aspect, there is more of a drive towards sensory food education and curriculum, because at the moment, food education doesn't really exist in a curriculum. It belongs within an umbrella of design and technology in secondary schools in England in particular. So you know, that's important, but food is everywhere, isn't it? In terms of curriculum, you know, it can be spread across a number of subjects. But again, I was interested in inequality. So how can we use, you know, to what extent has a school food plan supported provision in bridging gaps of inequality? Third, interested in the barrier, one of the barriers, which to what do people in schools and its staff perceive to be barriers of uptake of free school meals, which is in England, it's means tested, right? So universal infant free school meals are provided for all children from the ages of 5 through to 8. So from years reception to year 2. Sorry, that's just correct that. Reception to year 2. So for the first 3 years of their formal education, school meals are provided for all children. But not all schools are equipped with dining facilities, right? So quite often, a lot of the food is brought onto the premises, right? And not all schools have got the kind of facilities to be able to prepare food. So free school meals, at that point onwards, from year 2 throughout the rest of school life, it's means tested. So you can access a free school meal based on income, okay, and based on eligibility, all right? And the argument is that free school meals is one of the proxies that we use to measure disadvantage. But yeah, so I'm interested in a number of things there around school food, and you know, interested in social justice and education. But this is Maplefield Academy. This is where I did my latest piece of research. Well, not latest, one of my previous projects. That's my bag there. And so this is what a typical dining hall looks like in a secondary school in England in particular. What's happened is this school is rebuilt as an academy, and it was a lot bigger before. And what they're finding is that the spaces for eating are becoming smaller and smaller, right? And again, you can see there the vending machines. You know, this is kind of this. I didn't select this school because of its dining facilities and its school meals. You see, that was for my PhD. After that, I wanted to look more broadly, so I just went into an ordinary school, but one that was based in a socio-economically deprived area of central England, essentially, which is in the West Midlands, quite local to me. So, you know, this was that's obviously a pseudonym for the name of the school, which I have to anonymize, of course. So that's just one of the images, and you'll see the images as I move through the talk. Research design, 16 days of semi-structured observations in school restaurant, approximately 120 hours, 15 interviews, 8 with staff, 7 with pupils. These are where I undertook the kind of data collection. Thing is with ethnography, though, I'd often spend time just visiting the school, getting to know staff, getting to know what a typical daily routines are, and that's not something, you know, that's what I would record in my field notes. It's not something that, you know, I can quantify, right? Spending time there, getting to know their life, you know, building relationship with the pupils, the staff. They knew who I was as a researcher, and it was quite difficult to step away from my identity as a teacher previously to researcher, and you know, navigating that's quite interesting as well. And I'll talk about that later. I talked about the symbolic nature of food in school. It's not just about what's on the plate. It's about the messages. And this is another image from that same school. food for thought, right? These are the kind of messages that were dotted around the school. And what I found interesting was this is a kind of modern, it reflects modern dining spaces, whereas they also had like a bistro area, a cafe, different points at which where they could eat. Even outside, there's a seating area, and you'll see the image shortly. But again, very colourful, very bright, very open, very airy. And we're seeing a lot of that, which I think does go a long way in trying to entice children to sit and eat together. Because quite often, the time for eating, Lorene spoke about this yesterday, the time for eating is very short. You got to get in, you got to queue up, you got to eat, and then you want to, children want to play at lunchtime, and they've only barely got 20 minutes to do all that, before they go out and play. So the school lunch hour, has quickly eroded in some spaces, in some schools, from what I've seen and my observations. Just to look at some of the data from this project then. I'm going to read out some of these quotes, right? So in terms of the environment, I spoke to the catering manager, and she spoke about the eating spaces, and she said, we also use the outside area to communicate and converse as well as inside. The school canteen is designed in quite a nice way to facilitate that. Again, the emphasis on the social aspect. Because of the mass intake, 1,000 pupils and more, I haven't got a big enough kitchen to actually store the entire cutlery, the plates, the dishes. So some of the logistical issues, right? Compared with other schools, compared with our old school, which was an old building, we've gone down to half the size of what the old kitchen was. It's the storage. At the moment, the intake of kids we've got coming in for a meal is massive. And typically, so here's what I meant by the outside space for dining as well. But typically, the number of pupils eligible for free school meals at this school is above average, above the national average. The number of people who actually uptake the meal is around 20%. And I wanted to learn more about the stigmas because, we've got this kind of card machine now where it's very difficult to identify who's on free school meals, who isn't. I wanted to actually see that in action. And, some of the staff talked about, it wasn't actually about, it wasn't about the stigma of, free school meals. It was more about just children wanting to be there and wanting to eat. Some of the children just didn't want to eat the food. And that's what it comes down to as well. It is one thing being eligible and having access to food, but how do you get the children to eat? That's a huge challenge, which is often assumed, isn't it, from what I've recognized. So staff perspectives on food, about cost and choice. With 1,400 kids on the school register, we take more or less around 278 kids a day who actually take up free school meals, who will physically come for a meal. They might spend some of it at breakfast time, dinner time. We try and base things around these ideas. They've actually got £2.20 to spend, which is around £2.30 per meal in England. So of free school meals, what happens? They get a full traditional dinner and a pudding, dessert, for £2.20. They can get a jacket potato with 3 fillings and a little carton of pop, which is obviously the drink. We'll try and do lots of different meals. They can have as much salad as they want for 35 pence. This is the catering manager. The catering manager also mentioned that some children who aren't eligible for free school meals, they often haven't got the money. And what the catering manager has done in the past is given them the food anyway, right? And the school subsidizes that. Again, listening into presentations yesterday, we spoke about, we recognize how schools are having to subsidize very regularly for children to eat. Again, another view of the school canteen in this particular school. You could see again, more vending machines and the orange juices, the sugary drinks. Unfortunately, you know, the lowest bid wins. Goes against the eBay rules, right? When it comes to quality food, you get what you pay for. That's, you know, I read a report recently from the Food Foundation who spoke about, you know, it's very expensive to eat well and healthily. It is. And the reality is this, that, and okay, some have argued that if you buy food separately from a supermarket, salads, you can get a lot for your money, right? But if you haven't got the space to do that, if you haven't got the kitchen facilities to do that, you know, if you've got the time to go to the shops, what do? 99 pence for a burger at McDonald's, right? Which is very filling. You know, within a mile of the school, you can see the advertisement boards. The children see those when they're watching the TV shows on the iPads. It's everywhere. This is going to be embarrassing, but I'll do it anyway. I'm going to sing you a very short snippet song from one of my daughter's choir. So my daughter had a choir, a school play, and she came home and she said, Daddy, can I sing you a song? We're practicing. I said, go on then, okay. I got excited. I sat there with my coffee. So yeah, let's listen. Let's hear it. Okay, so here it goes. Just a few words from the song. Pizza Hut, Kentucky Fried Chicken and a Pizza Hut, Pizza Hut, Kentucky Fried Chicken and a Pizza Hut, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken and a Pizza Hut. And I'll just pause there because I didn't know whether to laugh, to cry. And I was like, and the children were engaged and she was really enjoying it. And I get that, you know, the policing around food. And this is a school where it's in a suburban area. It's not a private school, it's a state school. There's really no excuse. And that's the type of, you know, that's kind of another way in which children are exposed to convenience foods, let's say. So, and I think that's a huge problem. It's very problematic. And you know, this reflects, like I say, what goes on in school reflects what goes on in society. How are we going to change children's eating habits when we got, you know, teachers singing these songs? Children who are, you know, not interested in, I think, you know, so much bigger than just getting children to try different foods. So free school meals then. Access to free school meals. Pupils who are not aware. Access-wise, it's getting the kids to know that there are free school meals. That's getting in touch with the parents. If you've got kids coming that need a little bit more help, they then need to get in touch with the secretary of the school, then they need to do this, they need to do that. You know, it's so difficult, the challenges, just, you know, and then when are they going to do that? When have they got the time to do that? You know, lunchtime's already passed by. They've got to be at the school bell's ringing. See what I mean? So, you know, and that's coming from the catering manager again, which I had, with who I've had a lengthy discussion with. Pupils who do know about the access, okay, to free school meals. I know most kids would now want to say, "Oh, I'm free." You know, they'd rather keep their little bit of money in their pocket and say, you know, that stigma. I really think that's not the choice. I think it's down to the individual kid that wants to come through in general and eat. And this is what I mean. You know, for many years we've spoken about the stigma, and you know, if you historically you identified as free school meals, you feel excluded, and there's still examples of that. I get that. No, that's not great, of course. But then there's the other barrier of trying to get the kids to eat the food. And some of the examples, very select few examples of schools where I've seen where they have spaces for growing food, they have chef, they have kitchen facilities, right? The kids in that school, they love the food. Of course they're going to love the food because it comes down from the leadership. It's the ethos, right? It's the exposure. And if you make that the child's every day, then that's fantastic. You know, that's going to work. And it does work, and I've seen it. But the examples are very few, unfortunately. So what did the children say? It's so small, the space for eating. I want to put more chairs in it. We definitely need more seats. And they talk about the social opportunities. It's okay, but it's the queues. It takes so long. And then, it's the same food every single day. The other year groups come in before us, and we hardly get as much food. There's not much left. These are the kind of things that the kids are saying. And I think that's quite powerful in itself. So coming onto the concepts that I introduced the session with, sorry, how long have I got? Until 10:30, okay. The longer I've spent doing research on school food, the longer I recognize I'm not going to achieve a lot just by sitting behind a desk and writing and tapping away and, papers and research, grants, etc. Those are going to help me build evidence and make noise in a different way. I get that. But, I started to engage more with food education, charity, and kind of taste education, which I'll introduce shortly. I want to kind of engage and talk to young people regularly and see what they're saying and the challenges are. So that's important. But in terms of, because I was trained as a sociologist, I'm very interested in concepts and the theories of change, really. So in terms of food practices then, this focus particularly on individuals' food practices and how they are implicated in this process through the circulation of culinary capital, right? I spent a lot of time listening into what children talk about during mealtime, and the different spaces I go to, I quickly realize children who are able to go on holiday with their families and try different foods versus children who haven't even got a passport. Yeah, very different contexts, and all in the same country, and in England, for example, and I talk about, I'm doing research on the globalized South and the globalized North, but the poverty, the food insecurity is rife. So I think that speaks to this idea of culinary capital. Not everyone's going to have the opportunity to say, I've tried this fish, I've tried that, these kind of exotic foods even. So I think that's really interesting in terms of shaping children's eating habits and palates. That if we're trying to create policy and trying to get the cheapest meal in schools for children, then it's not going to be much choice available. And food also forms part of our identity. I refer to the word, sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, who defines cultural capital, how it inflects one's identity and life chances, right? Experiences. For instance, unhealthy food choices follow a socioeconomic gradient that explains what is meant by culinary capital, right? That's quite, how are you supposed to form and develop your culinary capital if you haven't got access to the foods and the nutritious foods? And it's a cycle of deprivation. Unless you break free from that, it's very difficult to educate. And commensality, again, spoken about at length within this context of a Nordic context. For Alan Ward, again, a sociologist, talks about commensality, how it involves eating at the same table, while a broader definition is given by Solbau and Nelson, who suggest that commensality is eating with other people. And again, just stop to pause there for a moment. It's not just about what's on the plate, it's about the environment. It's about shaping the whole child, right? Thinking back to the work of Amartya Sen, who's a developmental theorist. It's shaping the citizen. It's allowing a child to lead a life of choice, right? And that's quite important in thinking of looking at it more holistically, looking at the environment, and we can change and shape that. So in the past decade, commensality has been called upon by a number of scholars to provide a platform of how things should appear in such settings, including schools. So I'm beginning to see different spaces for eating, not just one fixed space. That's very narrow. You should be able to move around fluidly. It's an informal time of the school day. And some argue that it's a teaching occasion, but actually, it's where you kind of, we sit in sessions and we go out for breaks, for coffee, for lunch. We wind down. That's important, right? just to kind of move on to another project I've been working on. So this new project I'm working on is in a school which is very well known for its innovation, a primary school, innovation for championing school food. I'm talking about, awards have been won. This school is engaging with projects across Europe, and it's become very well known. And I want to just mention a couple of points. I just wanted to pull out a couple of key preliminary findings. The early years foundation stage lead, I asked them about what they thought. What is food education? What is food education? I'm really interested in its formal sense, in its informal sense even. In this school, I think it's a much broader term that encapsulates growing food, cooking food, eating, teaching the children about the importance of a healthy, balanced diet. And also about what you put into your body and how that affects what you are, and that affects the outside. You are what you eat. We heard this expression, and that's quite interesting in itself. And the school leadership, speaking with the head teacher, food education means opening children to experience the different cultures and using food as a way to engage with other cultures around the world, because it can open up that door to learning. So I talked about culinary capital, how powerful that is. And it has the element of the social side. It's about bringing people together. I observed children eating together who would not typically play together during break time. So food does bring us together in that way. Most of the children here now are having the lunch and sitting around, talking with their lunches, but also the aspect of bringing communities together as well. The wider, tapping into the local community, and that's crucial in forging relationships. So recommendations then for policy, for school leadership, and how do we engage? Policy to prioritize, we already know this, I'm preaching to the converted here. Prioritize a school meal as a site for supporting public health concerns, not looking at, as a previous speaker alluded to, not looking at school food as a problem, right? We're not looking for a solution to a problem. We've got to be more proactive than that. Investing in the health and well-being of the whole citizen, okay? In terms of leadership, I think it highlights this taking of a hybridized approach. For years, I talk about how we need to kind of listen to, take a bottom-up approach, right? And listen to the stakeholders. As important as that is, in order to enact those findings, those changes, those ideas, it's got to come from the leadership. There's got to be and I've seen an example of it in a school. It's got to come from the top as much as it has to come from the bottom, right? Pressure from both sides. It's about instilling, having a vision and following that through, right? So again, the Washington Academy in the UK is an example of that, okay? Engagement. I've spoken about interdisciplinary work, and with colleagues over the last couple of days, we've spoken about how food is interdisciplinary. It's in psychology, it's in education, it's in sociology, it's in public health, it's in medicine. But what I'm interested in is this transdisciplinary working. There's a number of people here today from a policy space, right? We had some children come yesterday, pupils from schools yesterday. Transdisciplinary work is so important. So we need to co-construct with those on the ground. We need to co-construct with school lunchtime supervisors and staff, catering managers, head teachers, and pupils themselves. But who are the stakeholders? It's the kids. They are the users of school dining spaces. Sorry, I'm just conscious of the time there. This is just, again, a quick overview of the selected projects. I'm happy to talk about these during lunch, etc. These are the projects I'm working on at the moment. First one's about kind of food insecurity. Second one's about school food policy. The third one is very much about sociology of food. And the fourth is about sustainable futures, which is a collaborative project with colleagues in Brazil. And as part of that project, we costed in and funded fruit and vegetable baskets, right? Because I'm conscious that applying for all this research funding, but there's still kids going hungry, and that plays on my mind a lot. So it's that moral compass for me. Doing ethnography in schools, your identity as a researcher, co-construction is important. Transdisciplinary research has so much potential, and we can influence policy by spending time, getting to know the space, the culture. What do they do there? What are they doing? They're so different. An influence of the theories of change. How can we what things do we need to unlearn? Not just about new learnings, but what am I saying that's problematic? I continue to question myself. But also, doing ethnography in school, think of your identity. Who are you, right? What is your lived reality of school mealtime? So that's important. That does come into play. And I believe that research is subjective. I will say that openly, because we're going with a set of research questions. We're looking for something. But what emerges from here, and there's a reason why I like to start with talking about the data, because I like the data's got to do the talking. We've got to listen to that data, and then theorizing does help to make sense of that. Taste Education, a food education charity. I'm one of the trustees, and we've got one of the co-founders with us today here, Dr. Jason O'Rourke. This organization, very kind of innovative and growing very fast. It's only been around 5 years or so. We help schools and nurseries to deliver taste education to give every child the opportunity to experience the joy of fresh fruits and vegetables. We believe learning about food should be more carrot, less stick. Okay? And you can visit their website and you can learn more about that. During the pandemic, we provided free teaching resources to schools. I'm also regularly engaged with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for School Food. Sharon Hodgson, who's the MP, is the chair of that APPG, and we talk regularly and disseminate our findings through that space. So we're trying to make sure that research is not just gathering dust, that it's trying to, that we're being heard. Some of the references from today's session, again, happy to share the presentation for anybody who wants it. And these are the selected publications, some of the work I've been doing. And finally, thank you guys so much for listening, being patient, and for the opportunity.